Would you like to play some football?
Hey, welcome to another edition of Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast. Week 10 is sadly in the books, and it's a whole lot more sadly for some than others. Hugh Freeze is no longer the head coach of Auburn. In this week's edition of the Who Gets Fired Today, we record this on Sunday nights, and on Sunday mornings, somebody gets the axe every week. That's how this works. But before we go anywhere, whether it's on the field stuff or what happens in boardrooms on Sunday mornings, Brad Edwards joins me on the pod. I'm George Schroeder. He's Brad Edwards. And I'm just so glad when you're able to join and we can talk college football. Obviously, Brad, you and I put this thing together a couple of years ago, and it has been a labor of love. And man, I'm glad you're joining me today.
Good to be back. And look, I mean, you're obviously much more prepared for this. I see all of the background. You know, you've got the props and
Yeah,
look at me. Look at my
check us out. Check us out on YouTube, and then notice his background versus mine.
Exactly.
That's right.
But the other thing, George, is I appreciate you pointing out that Week 10 is in the books. I think it was always around double digits when I would just stop counting. It's like, okay, we're well into the season at this point. Like we lose track. And of course, maybe the more significant thing time-wise for fans out there is that we are now into the week where the first playoff selection committee rankings are going to come out, and we'll have something to go off of other than the AP poll, something that actually means something. And
it's not supposed to, but inevitably it does. That's my rant for the moment.
And it's not going to hold up. Like we know there are many, many losses coming. But you know what? And I think maybe this season, even more so than last year, it's just demonstrating what the expansion of the playoff has done and is going to continue to do for interest in the final 4 to 5 weeks of the regular season, in that there are so many more teams that have a shot, and so many games that used to not mean a whole lot now really do, because I mean, they're teams that are, 4th or 5th in the conference standings that still aren't out of this thing as far as a chance to get into the playoff automatically. And it makes some of these games really fun and compelling.
Well, especially if you're in the SEC and to a slightly lesser extent, the Big Ten. That's absolutely the case because they're going to end up with 4 or more teams in there. But this is something that you talked about as we sort of look forward to the playoff, and then last year as we sort of tried to figure out what it was going to look like as the season unfolded, was this idea that as the calendar turned into November, there were going to be so many more teams with at least fans thought they had a shot to get in the playoff. If this happens and this happens. Well, man, I mean, we're probably at 30 teams that think they can get in the playoff right now. Now, obviously only 12 can, and some of those teams is like the longest of long shots. But one of the things they wanted to do when they expanded the playoff was to create this kind of hope, I guess would be the word, this late in the season, and it'll narrow down each week a little bit, right? So as one example, Saturday night, Tennessee got voted off the island, basically, by getting beat at home. And
you would think
taking their third loss. Now, I'm not saying we're not going to. We'll have a 9-3 team in the playoff, maybe even this year. It's just most of the time it's not going to be happening, and it's not going to be Tennessee this year. Losing at home to Oklahoma, which that was sort of a playoff elimination game in a lot of ways.
Kept Oklahoma alive for at least
on
another game.
First day of November, and an elimination game, and Oklahoma goes to Knoxville and wins that game, and so they're 6-2, and their playoff hopes hang by a thread, but they're still in it. Well, there's 25 or 30 teams that can realistically, I guess, realistically maybe is not the right word, but hope that they can get in. That's what they were going for when they did this.
Yeah.
And on Tuesday night, and some of you guys are listening to this after the fact, but on Tuesday night, they'll unveil those playoff rankings, and only everybody will go crazy about them. And this is just my little disclaimer for you guys, my PSA, my public service announcement. It doesn't matter. Don't get worked up. It doesn't matter yet. It'll matter here in a little bit, and then you can all get mad about why your team didn't get in and that team from the other conference with the weaker schedule did. Whatever. Doesn't matter on Tuesday. But Brad, man, I'm so glad that you're here. Since the last time, it's been 4 or 5 weeks since you were on the show, on the pod, And before we get into kind of the events of the weekend, I just want to say that the last time you and I talked, I think we weren't really sure what to make of this Alabama team. And I know you've been paying close attention to them. You are an Alabaman. You are an Alabama guy. You've been paying close attention to them. They've only rounded into shape where, okay, I think maybe Texas A&M is the best team in the SEC, but Alabama seems like the other team you would say is right there, as in creme de la creme of the SEC this year. That's my estimation. I just kind of wonder what your thoughts are, kind of big picture viewing the season so far.
Yeah, I think the last time I was on was the week before Alabama played Georgia. So it was prior to this run where they knocked off all those ranked teams in a row. And yeah, I mean, obviously the feelings about Alabama nationally have changed dramatically over the course of this, but I'm not sure I feel a whole lot different about them. I mean, obviously they've put themselves in a really good position to be able to make the playoff, but still every week that goes by, I watch them and I think to myself, all right, I mean, they're good, but this would not be one of Nick Saban's, if he was still there. If we're comparing it to the Nick Saban era, this would not be one of the top 5 teams from the Saban era, maybe not top 8, and because you look at so many of these deficiencies. But then I also think to myself, well, I'm looking around the rest of the country.
Yes.
And who else is that? Like they're still good enough to beat anybody on a given day, I think.
No, I think that's the whole thing.
Yeah. And so it's like you don't have to be as dominant as those Alabama teams or the Georgia teams from a few years ago, or some of the Ohio State teams or Clemson teams from the previous 10 years. The bar is lower now because of this combination of NIL and the transfer rules, and the best teams are not as deep as they used to be.
That's right. And the teams below them are better than they were.
And having, because of the thinner margins between the top tier and maybe the second tier, great quarterback play can, I think, take you further. And especially if you've got elite players elsewhere on offense. And I think that's where you look at Alabama and you say, okay, on any given day, they can take out anybody because they have the quarterback, they have the receivers. The problem with them, and they're not alone. There are other teams that have various, glaring weaknesses relative to what you would say for a top 5 team. Alabama's offensive line is still mediocre. They cannot run the ball against a good defense. Not even close. So they're lucky to break 50 yards on the ground against a decent defense, and they don't pass protect well. So they have to have good enough pass protection to be able to hit a few big plays during the game and then not have the quarterback get his head knocked off and fumble and end up, committing a costly turnover because of the poor protection. But, the defense is, I would say, above average. They have their issues. They kind of bend but don't break, but just kind of bring it back. Like, I just think that they are typical of a lot of the top teams right now in that
that's right.
There are some glaring weaknesses. And yeah, they wouldn't stack up with the best teams of the last 15 years or so in college football, but they don't have to, because that's not what the sport is.
And that's the point. It's not just that you don't have to be. Fans have got to figure this out. You're not going to be. Even the Alabamas and Georgias of the world. And look, I know Ohio State's running roughshod over people. Still don't know what I think about them, because they haven't run the same gauntlet, even as some teams in their own league. But I think they've been routinely really good. They've done what they're supposed to do. But unless Ohio State is head and shoulders above everybody else, unless A&M is actually head and shoulders above everybody else, and I'm not sure that they are. A&M has a much better resume and has been routinely impressive. Not only is it's not just that you don't have to be, it's that you can't be. You're not going to be as dominant. You're not going to see those kinds of teams. Maybe once in a blue moon, but routinely, you're not going to have that gap where you have one team or two teams or maybe 3 teams that are so much more talented and stacked than everybody else, not just in the conference, but in the country. Those days are over, at least with the current iteration of NIL and the portal, the current combination of that. So what Alabama has done is just, they look like they've got at least as good a shot as anybody else of winning it, which is not what we would have thought after the first week. But man, think about all the things we thought after the first week. LSU must be really good. They went into Clemson's Death Valley and beat Clemson. Well, it turns out Clemson isn't any good at all. They just lost at home to Duke. They're 3-5. I think they're 3-5. Might be 3-6.
I think
but
that's
they're 3
right. Yeah.
And then, Brian Kelly is no longer employed. That was the subject of last week's, podcast. And, you on and on and on, all these things you thought. Now, it always was like that, where the first week or two you wildly overestimate stuff, but it feels much worse this year. All right, so the coaching carousel is spinning completely out of control compared to what
Hey, by the way, George, the last time I was on the podcast with you, the top 2 job openings in college football were Virginia Tech and Oklahoma State. That's how much has changed.
And we were amazed at how early those jobs were open.
Right.
It's like, oh my, can you imagine this? This is amazing. And now it's just like every week a job or 2 or 3 opens. James Franklin, that's old news, right? He's out at Penn State. Billy Napier, he gone from Florida. Look, it's not surprising that some of the guys are fired. It's just the way it's all happening. So Brian Kelly at LSU. And then this morning, and again, we record these on Sunday nights, came the news that after a 10-3 home loss to woebegone Kentucky, Auburn has let go of Hugh Freeze, and he finishes with a losing record at Auburn. And the guy's an offensive guru, and their offense can't find the end zone. He actually built a pretty good defense. It's actually better than pretty good. It's a really good defense, but their offense is terrible, and they made the wrong choice on a transfer portal quarterback in Jackson Arnold that Oklahoma was, glad, happy to see, to escort, usher on out. And that's not that they didn't like him. He just wasn't very good. Made the wrong choice in Jackson Arnold, and then just things haven't gone well for him. But Hugh Freeze, so this coaching carousel, I don't think we've ever seen it. I know we've never seen anything like it, and it's not stopped yet. There's more to come. Although, let me caution you, fans who want your coach fired, we're going to run through this list of jobs here in a minute. And if we start matching candidates with them, we probably won't get to that. And you start going, well, what if we added our guy? We got rid of our guy and added our school into the mix. Who are you going to get? Listen, that's always a thing, but I'm saying this year is not the year to sort of hop into the market if you're not one of the top jobs, period. So this might be a year to hang on to your guy if you can and think about it for next year. So, but Hugh Freeze, I realize it's sort of predictable at Auburn, given how things are going. I get it, but just it's still surreal to me, Brad. The whole thing.
Yeah. How many coaches is Auburn paying right now? Like head coaches?
All of the coaches. Well, let's see. They're still playing in Harsin. I don't know. Have they paid off Gus Malzahn? I bet you they're about to, once Hugh hits the actual, I bet that's 3. Because I bet they're still paying, what was Gus's, 27, 28 million, which was a big, big, big deal at the time, that buyout. That buyout. And I don't know what Harsin's was, but so Hugh Freeze's is a relatively manageable 15 point something million. Paid out over 4.5 years,
which I guess is why it happened, because compared to others, like, okay, this is you're getting off pretty cheap to do it. Now look, the fact that Auburn has cleaned out so many coaches because they're not performing at the standard they expect, that tells you how much they care about football, which on one hand says, okay, this would be a good place to be a head coach because there's a lot of passion. At the same time, well, obviously you better perform or you're going to be gone. The evidence is already there to back that up. But you look at the other jobs that are out there, and how many jobs are there, I guess is the question, that would be more attractive to an up and coming head coach than the Auburn job? And I think there are at least 3, and we can kind of go through that. But I think that's where, if you're Auburn, you think, okay, we got a lot of stuff going for us. This is a great place to be. But I think if you're someone outside the program, you're like, okay, maybe that is a good job. But I think this one and this one and this one would all be better. And I have a hard time seeing Auburn be able to hit a home run with this hire, just because I don't think by any stretch they have their pick of the litter.
Well, it's not going to be one of those wins the press conferences home run hires. There may be a home run hire, but it may not be one that everybody's like,
but it's not going to be the one the fans are thrilled about.
9 Power 4 openings right now as we record Sunday night. I'm not anticipating another one tonight, but who knows? 9 Power 4 openings, 11 FBS openings if you add Oregon State and UAB in. 9. There's going to be potentially, unless people back off because of how many there are, potentially a couple more. I think Kentucky could open, Colorado could open. Now, that wouldn't be them pushing Dion out. I think that'd be more like people wonder if Coach Prime's, ready to finish because of just how bad the program's going. He's got the health issues and everything else, but that could open. There's maybe 2 or 3 more I'm not thinking of right now. But
I like Luke Fickell. Is he in the clear? Yeah, I don't know. Mike
Only,
Norvell.
yeah, Norvell for sure. Florida State, that's iffy. Wisconsin, that would seem like a foregone conclusion, except for A, the buyout. Although I'm through thinking people are not going to pay the buyouts. But B, if you're thinking who we going to get because of the glut of openings, but I don't know that some of these schools are really going to think that way. So those jobs could open too. But of the 9 Power 4 jobs, we were talking about this. You don't think Auburn ranks any higher than 4th, I think. Does
Right.
that be right?
Yeah.
Okay, so give me your list, sort of.
Yeah, so I was actually thinking about this after the game last night when there were a lot of things swirling about, maybe this could be it for Hugh Freeze, and I saw Adam Rittenberg wrote something on this on ESPN.com, and he ranked the openings. I agree. I don't remember what he had after number 4, but I agree with his top 4. He had LSU at number 1, Penn State at 2, Florida at 3, and then Auburn at 4. That's probably the order I would put them. I think you could
Yeah.
certainly argue for various reasons as to whether someone would want LSU over Penn State, vice versa. They all have their pros and cons. Just, the more I look at it and I sit there and I break it down in my head as to this is something that I wouldn't like about this job or I'd be leery of, the more I think to myself, Lane Kiffin would be an idiot to leave Ole Miss. I would stay there because
This isn't
I
the
just
same
think
thing as 5 years ago. It's not the
you're right.
same.
It's not. I'm not going to say that you have just as good of a chance to win a national championship at Ole Miss as you would at an LSU or a Florida. But I tell you what, your chance of making the playoff is not a whole lot different at Ole Miss, especially with what he has in place there. And being able to make the playoff every now and then at Ole Miss makes you a legend. If you just make the playoff every now and then at LSU, especially now that it's expanded to 12, you're going to get fired. And, for that reason, I think coaches like Kiffin who have a pretty good situation, I think they'd be a little bit foolish to leave. I mean, if you've got something in place where you think you can just rinse and repeat, and I think that's kind of where he is in Oxford right now. I think he has enough support to be able to get the money he needs to get the right guys out of the portal each year to kind of keep this thing rolling. You know, I just I'm not sure that I'm not sure there can be a whole lot of proven head coaches, guys that have won a lot of games at the Power 4 level that are going to be lining up for any of these jobs because like you said, I think things have changed.
Yeah, I think that's right. Now, I will tell you this, Lane Kiffin is going to be much more highly compensated
Yes.
even if he's still in Oxford
A
because
lot of
of
coaches are
this.
going to get raises,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so I don't have any issue with LSU, Penn State, Florida, Auburn as the top 4 openings. I think that's fine. I mean, you're right. People could quibble about this, that, or the other. I think it makes all the sense in the world. The only reason I might wonder about LSU has nothing to do with the actual natural resources there, i.e., recruiting territory, passion, which also translates there to crazy, but passion. Everybody's all in. The lack of alignment. In fact, the fact that there's no AD now because Scott Woodward got the axe.
The fact that the governor is calling the shots.
The fact that the governor says the board of supervisors is going to, the governor is sticking his nose in at every point. I mean, it's Huey Long territory here. And if you don't know who Huey Long is, go look him up, right? The former governor from back in the 30s, I guess, 20s and 30s. But just sort of the oddity of the alignment would be the only reason. But LSU is a great job. LSU, Penn State, Florida, Auburn. I'm good with that. Let's just go with that. How would you rank the other 5 of the 9 Power 4 jobs, right? So here are the other ones that are open. Just sort of, I think this is roughly in order of how Stanford opened before the season, but roughly in order of how they opened. But Oklahoma State, Virginia Tech, Arkansas, Oregon State, and UAB, I don't remember when those happened. And then Stanford. How would you rank those jobs?
UCLA. Did you say UCLA?
I did not say UCLA. I didn't, but I should have.
Okay.
Before this, like the last time you were on the pod, you would have said probably Oklahoma State, Virginia Tech. Those are 2 pretty good jobs. Well, now if we figure the top 4 are the ones we talked about, where would you rank these jobs? It's hard.
So, I would be reluctant to take either the Arkansas or the UCLA job just because of how many teams you're going to have to overcome in those conferences in order to get to, say, a playoff level. And I realize for every program, it's not about making the playoff. Some of them at this stage would just love to be a regular bowl team again.
but they think it is. I promise you, in their heart of hearts, they think that's what why can't we be Ole Miss too? You know what I mean?
Oh, you know what? And I can't blame them for thinking that way. When you look at an Ole Miss or look at Indiana, it's like
Mhm.
if Indiana can do this, I mean, look, I think about a program like Wisconsin, and we talked about them as a possibility of making a change. You look at what Wisconsin has done since the mid '90s, all the way up until very, very recently. They have been so far above Indiana as a program, and you look at this and you're like, well, if they can do that, why could we not do that with the right head coach and, whatever other variables there are that they would need to iron out. I think the same thing will be true with UCLA. They're going to look at the talent base they have within a certain radius of their
Mhm.
campus, and why not us? And so I think there are a number of schools that would feel that way. I think, though, once you get beyond those four that we just said, I think your best path, and I'm not saying that these aren't stepping stone jobs in the grand scheme of things, but having an automatic berth to the playoff for the conference champion, I think makes these ACC and Big 12 positions maybe a little bit more attractive. And so I'm talking about Virginia Tech and Oklahoma State.
Yeah, I'd agree
Where
with that.
I would rank those, that's really tough. Like, who do I think's got a better chance of winning one of those conferences, or at least maybe finishing top two in one of those conferences to be a legitimate team in the playoff discussion? It feels like a toss up to me. I don't know. Do you have a preference?
Well, I don't know if it's kind of regional bias. I mean, spend a lot of time in the center of the country, but man, Blacksburg, Virginia is hard to get to. And it's not like Stillwater is a Metro Stillwater, Oklahoma. It's not. It's a small town. It's a ag school, but you are in close proximity to Texas talent. Right now, everybody's coming to Texas, right, from every league, right, including the Big 12. But SEC, everybody's recruiting Texas. But it feels like if you get the right guy there, I mean, Mike Gundy had Oklahoma. Now he's the only guy who's ever done it consistently and to the level of this at Oklahoma State. So that would mitigate against this. But it feels like if you get the right guy there and you have the right sort of alignment, why in the world would Texas Tech be the only place where you can have these sort of great buy a team, rent a team type
Yeah,
situations,
yeah.
which is what we're in now. And that's not a slight to Texas Tech. That's the new world we're in. Why in the world couldn't you do that at Oklahoma State and just, recruit and transfer portal the heck out of Texas? That feels like to me. And I think, and I know this goes against something we're going to talk about here in a minute, I think it's not just sort of potentially easier to recruit to Stillwater. And I've got East Coast listeners that are like, you're crazy. I think it's not only just that, I think it's also sometimes you could see Oklahoma State becoming a more consistent top of the Big 12, top of the upper tier of the Big 12 type program. They're terrible right now. But just in the last 15, 20 years, they've seemed like they could be that team, that one of those schools, especially after the departure of Texas and Oklahoma. That's
Yeah,
my thought.
I think, and then maybe this is what you're getting at. I don't look at the Big 12 and pinpoint any one team and say, hey, there's no reason that this team shouldn't be top three in the conference every single year. They have all the resources. There's not anyone that checks those boxes. Whereas
They
in the
can rise and
ACC,
fall. Yeah.
right. In the ACC, I look at it and I'm like, you know what? Clemson should be good. Florida State should be good. Miami should be good.
There's three of
And
those at least.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and so Virginia Tech, to a certain extent, you're kind of hoping that at least two of those three are going to be down in order for you to make a move,
Mm-hmm.
unless you get another Michael Vick. Which, I mean, I think where we are, especially with the portal, there are guys out there that for whatever reason are overlooked by the top schools, and somebody's going to end up with them.
Well,
But
that can
barring a
absolutely happen.
generational quarterback,
But it doesn't
yeah,
happen there. It could happen anywhere now, right?
right,
That's the
yeah,
thing.
for sure,
So
for sure.
I think I'd go with, but one of those two schools, Oklahoma State, Virginia Tech, be next. And then we could argue all day long. Arkansas, UCLA, clearly one of those two teams, I think. Stanford, Stanford's
You
a
know
tough
what?
spot.
You had that stretch with Harbaugh and David Shaw where they made it look like a really good job, but they overachieved such a degree that it's just, I mean, I have a hard time seeing Stanford get back to being that on a consistent basis. But, with the right coach, I guess anything is possible. Yeah, I think out of the 9 and the Power 5, Stanford would probably be the the bottom of the list right now.
I think that's right. Well, there's going to be more open, it seems like, despite the fact that there's a glut in the market. But so we'll see what happens. Actually, on the field this weekend, we had some interesting things happen, right? First of all, Navy got dropped from the unbeaten ranks by North Texas. That just all that does is throw sort of the American Conference race into further kind of chaos. And we all think that's where the Group of Five champion, and that's not how it's designated, but that's where the a slot for the playoff will be one of some number of teams. And so Navy drops from unbeaten. Georgia Tech, after being 8-0 for the first time since 1969, gets beat by a mediocre, which probably didn't need to say this is kind of the adjective for NC State, but they got beat by NC State. And so they're now 8-1. We'll see what that means. The biggest result of the weekend, though, was Miami went to Dallas and got popped by SMU, and Mario Cristobal had, kind of some late game things happen. And so Miami's now 10-2, and the playoff road is still there, but it gets much more difficult. They can still get to the playoff, but it gets much more difficult. And I think that was I think that's pretty critical loss for Miami as it relates to the playoff, as it relates to what they thought they had. I think they thought they had an offense that with Carson Beck was maybe almost as good as it had been a year earlier with Cam Ward, and they thought they had a better defense and that they thought they had a really good shot this year. And I think a lot of us thought that, but you can't go lose. This SMU team is not the same as last year's SMU team. This is a SMU team that got beat by Baylor at home earlier in the year, and Baylor's just mediocre. Now, week to week, everything changes, but that was the biggest result of the weekend, I think. Texas beating Vanderbilt was a deal we need to get to in a second, but Miami SMU, that's a bad result for the Hurricanes. Bad result.
Yeah, and I think for Miami, one of the damaging aspects of it is where it puts them in the conference standings. Because they're sitting there at 2-2. Obviously, you want to get into that conference championship game, because if you do, you win that one game and you're in. It doesn't matter what your record is at that point. The selection committee, they just got to decide what your seating is at that stage. Right. You can win your way in. But Miami now 2-2 in the conference, and I'm sitting here looking at the standings. You got Virginia at 5-0 in the league. And then you have 5 teams that are sitting there at either 5-1 or 4-1 in the league. So Miami needs a lot of help to just be able to get into that ACC championship game. And I don't think they have a resume that's going to get them in without being a conference champion. Right. They don't have enough quality wins there. And that, so that, yeah, I think that's the issue for them.
And that takes us to the other side of this. One of the reasons is because at-large spots are going to come at a premium. I think the SEC is going to gobble up a bunch. The Big Ten could gobble up one more or so than we think they might, right? Right now you would think Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon are in. Could there be a fourth one that gets gobbled up? Quite probably there could be. The SEC could get 4, is going to get 4, it might get 5, right? So we have sort of thought the ACC would get a couple, but in our extensive pre-show production, you and I were talking, and it's possible we need to flip the script and think the Big 12 might be the better league than the ACC. And as that relates, this doesn't necessarily follow. The Big 12 could be the better league or not, and it doesn't mean that you're going to get another playoff spot. But if there's a second playoff spot to be had, it might go to a Big 12 team, not an ACC team. That could happen too.
Yeah, I think there's a really good chance of that. And when you look at the ACC and you realize, like, okay, there are a bunch of teams that are good but not great. Even those teams at the top of the standings are probably going to lose more games over the next 3 or 4 weeks, which I think there's a very good chance you could go into that ACC championship game saying, all right, winner gets in, and that's the only team from the league that's going to get into the playoff. Whereas I could certainly see a scenario playing out where the Big 12 at least goes into conference championship weekend with the possibility of 2 getting there. And that is one of the things, like you said, the committee rankings this week are not going to tell us, they're not going to tell us anything that you can really latch onto and put a lot of stock in. But I think there are some things that will be interesting about them. And one of them will be, okay, who is the highest ranked team in the ACC? Who's the second highest ranked team? How do they compare to the top ranked teams in the Big 12? Now, granted, the top 2 teams in the Big 12 standings are going to play each other this weekend, and so that's going to have an impact with BYU at Texas Tech.
BYU at Texas Tech, yeah.
Yeah. But you know what? If there were 3 Big 12 teams, for example, ranked ahead of the second highest ranked team from the ACC, that tells me something. And so because look, none of these teams it's not like any of them have a top 5 opponent looming at the end of the schedule. Where, I mean, look, the closest thing anybody has, unless I'm overlooking something, is Georgia Tech having the opportunity to beat Georgia on that rivalry weekend. But outside of that,
that'd be a big deal.
That would be a big
for multiple reasons. Yeah,
and look, and I guess there's probably a scenario where Georgia Tech could win out and not get into the ACC championship game. But if that happened and they beat Georgia, I think they're in.
I do too. Yeah.
Yeah. But aside from something like that happening, yeah, I think that's the key, is that there are not a lot of big time resume builders on the remaining schedules of these ACC and Big 12 teams. So being able to run the table from here, I think is going to be important to a lot of these schools as far as being able to finish there in the top 12.
I think so too. That's something to watch. Look, here's another thing that we continue to watch. He's not in any danger of being pushed out. I mean, I can't imagine this could be the case, but maybe he'll get tired of it. But man, Clemson loses at home to Duke, gives up a ton of points, loses at home to Duke, and the video shows, for those of us who could see it, but that's another story. I've seen the highlights. The video shows Dabo Swinney losing it on the sidelines at some players, and there may be being and it's so hard to tell sometimes what's actually happening because you don't have any audio. You're not really in the moment. You're just seeing it from afar. But it appears maybe he's not getting a whole lot of positive reactions from the players that he's ranting at. And his struggles at Clemson continue to spiral, which is still surprising to me. And I think we're at a point now where we have to figure out what's going to transpire at Clemson. Again, he's not getting pushed out, but this is not getting better, at least not in the short term. It's not getting better. And I'm kind of surprised. But here's my sort of thought was this. I think this is highly unlikely. I don't think that he would do this. But is it possible you could get tired of it if you're Dabo and you could say, I can take one of those other gigs? I don't know. I'm just toss that out there.
The thing that is tough for me with this is that Dabo is such a competitor, and it's hard for me to see him basically throw in the towel, which is what it would be. If they have a bad season, and look, I know in his press conferences, he will often, give this whole, hey, people don't want me around. But I can't see him actually doing it. And just
Right.
walking out saying I'm not appreciated, and so therefore I'm leaving. I think he's too much of a competitor to have had the success that he's had and to go out on such a low point as this season. Now, you do have to ask the question, how long would it take for him to have another roster that's going to line up the way this one seemed to in the preseason, where they had the guys back that you would seem to need to be able to make a run? I don't know. I don't know where Clemson is right now as far as NIL and what they have in place and their willingness to pay up to get some of the best players in. You would think that wouldn't be an issue for them.
Some of that seems to have been his problem. He's not really
right.
He's not willing. He hasn't
certainly
embraced
on the
portal.
The transfer end, it definitely was. Yeah.
But that's the end. But that's the other. That's a big piece of the whole NIL deal is, right? Yes, you want to retain your own guys. You got to pay them a bunch of money in the NIL. I would assume you're right that Clemson would have zero problem investing that way. But, in today's world, you have got to play the remake the roster every year game because everybody else is playing it. And I don't know if he's willing to do that.
Yeah. I mean, look, the other thing is that, I mean, once you, like you said, he's not going to get pushed out. I just cannot imagine with all that he's done that they're going to say, you know what, Dabo, it's time. We need to go in a different direction, especially because he's so young. It's not like it's somebody in his 70s and you said the game's passed him by. Now, I guess you could say the game's passed him by if you wanted to take that approach, but it wouldn't be because of age. But if you're looking right now at the standings and you're seeing the teams that are on top of the ACC, I mean, whether you're an administrator at Clemson or Florida State, you're thinking this conference is ripe for the taking. If we can get the right guy in here with the money behind it, it shouldn't take. This shouldn't be a 4-year plan to get
right.
On top of the league.
That's right.
At the right place, it could happen very, very quickly, much more quickly than it could in any number of other conferences. And so, once again, I'm not thinking that they would push Dabo out because of that, but I do know that for as bad as it looks this year, 2 years from now, if everything falls into place, Clemson could be right back in the top 10 and looking like a team that's capable of making a run in the playoff because
No question.
but just because of the league that they're in and the setup.
All right, we could keep going, and I do want to mention that after everybody give up the Longhorns for dead, all they've done is win a bunch of games. Now they escaped Kentucky and they escaped Mississippi State, and then they got out big on Vanderbilt. This is the best team they played since beating Oklahoma. They got out big on Vanderbilt, and Vanderbilt ranked higher than Oklahoma. I don't know if they ranked higher than Oklahoma was at the time. Whatever, got out big on them and then escaped, but they're winning. They're winning, and Arch Manning is a winning quarterback. He's not a Heisman contender, he's not in that breath. All that stuff is past, but all their goals are intact, Brad.
This is another one that I think is going to be fascinating to see what the selection committee does because
on Tuesday, this first rankings.
Right.
Yeah.
Because Texas, like on one hand, you could look and say, look, they only have 2 losses and one of them is at Ohio State. So, I mean, certainly no shame in that. But on the other hand, you look at, and forget Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's a good team. I mean, a 3-point win over Vanderbilt, even on your home field, that's a resume builder. But going to overtime at Mississippi State and Kentucky, yeah, I can see some people say, you know what, they got 2 losses plus those 2 that could have been lost. I could see people, depending on which numbers they're looking at, taking any number of approaches on Texas. In other words, I could see if you ask the 13 people in that selection committee, when they start their process, when they start their day and they have to rank all the teams 1 through 25, I could see there being as much as a 10 or 12 spot difference in where some of them have ranked Texas to begin with before they begin the conversations. But I do think they'll be fascinating to see what is the bigger deal, the record or what they've actually done, how the eye test, I guess, is probably the way to say it, the eye test, because for most of this season, they have not passed the eye test, especially in light of the amount of talent that we know that they have.
No, they really haven't, but they keep winning, and that's eventually that's got to matter, right?
Survive and advance.
So that's right. All right, this week we mentioned BYU at Texas Tech. Just a couple of games I'm going to be watching. BYU at Texas Tech. An intriguing matchup for me is Oregon at Iowa. We don't think much about Iowa. We sort of joke about their lack of offense through the years and all that kind of thing. This Oregon team, I think, is really good, but they got handled by Indiana at home. And the win at Penn State obviously doesn't look the same and hasn't looked the same since shortly afterward. I think they're really good, but I also think you can't just go, they're going to beat Iowa. I think that's a very interesting game. And Iowa is a team that if the Big Ten's potentially going to get a 4th team in, it might be someone like in Iowa. That's one I want to watch. What's amazing is...
I think the other part of this, though, George, is that if Oregon were to lose...
Absolutely.
If Oregon were to lose, what do they have on their resume that would make them a safe pick for the playoff? If they take now, I mean, at 10-2,
but somebody's got to get in. Is the problem.
That's right. Somebody's got to get in. But I think if they lose to Iowa, their margin for error is gone at that point.
Oh, completely agreed. Yeah. And listen, they still have a resurgent Washington to play. I mean, there's. USC comes to Eugene. I don't think a ton of USC, but Lincoln Riley, went and won at Nebraska and has won some games. That they're 6-2 or 7-2. So that's a game that Oregon at Iowa is one I will look at. I think Texas A&M at Missouri would have been more interesting, but except for the injury to the quarterback at Missouri. LSU at Alabama is supposed to be interesting, but I'm not very interested in it. Other than just what can they do after Brian Kelly? They had an open week. What will they be able to present?
Where I kind of fall in this is that we saw what Florida did against Georgia. And I think for the most part, the players at Florida were more behind Billy Napier than the players at LSU seemed to be behind Brian Kelly.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you've got talent and you just have a difficult time wanting to play for your coach, and then he's gone, you can flip a switch to a certain degree and play a lot better. And we've seen this a number of times where there's a coaching change in the middle of the season and all of a sudden the team starts winning for the interim coach. And then, the administration feels pressure to hire the interim because the team's playing so well. I'm not projecting that's what's going to happen at LSU, but I am saying this is a real thing that sometimes a coaching change can help a team get more excited about going out there and play closer to their potential. Is it possible that, LSU's ceiling is much higher than what we've seen at any point this season, given the rivalry? Might they play up to that level and give Alabama a scare, if not pull an upset? I wouldn't say it's impossible, especially because Alabama, as we talked about earlier, they're not a dominant team. I just don't think it's in their makeup to blow anybody out. I just, even with what LSU's been going through recently, I would almost be shocked if this game is over at the start of the fourth quarter. I think just about anybody with a pulse is going to hang around with Alabama and at least make it a game into the final 10 minutes or so. And I look, if I'm Alabama, I would have much rather had Brian Kelly still there than have him. Not to mention they had a bye week to get, and you just never know what types of things a new coaching, or not a new coaching staff, but with someone new in charge, what they might come out and do. They got nothing to lose. Maybe they start running trick plays. I just think when a team has the athletes that LSU has, it's kind of scary when you get them in that position where they don't have anything to lose and maybe they get excited about playing it.
I think I don't know what to think about it, but I bet you Alabama has it in hand by the fourth quarter. I think so little of that LSU team, just based on how they played. But I hear you. Oh, look,
they have offensive line issues, and sometimes it doesn't matter how excited you get. If you can't block, that's pretty much the end of the story.
Fair enough. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and head to the locker room and come back second half. We're going to talk about our favorite subject. We love football, but we love to talk about our shared faith in Christ. So hang around. We'll be right back with the second half of Gridiron and the Gospel. And welcome back to Gridiron and the Gospel, a Faith in College football podcast. Second half starts now, the faith half. I'm George Schroeder, joined by Brad Edwards, which makes me happy. This part of the podcast is why we started the podcast, Brad.
Yep.
Is the faith in Christ that you and I share, and we want to share with others, and we want them to share that faith with us. And so I'm so glad, again, to say this, that you're on the pod this week. Glad you're here.
Oh, good to be here. And yeah, when we first talked about it, it was like, okay, let's give the people something that they love to talk about, love to listen to people talk about, which is college football, and then follow it up with something that's even more important that, hopefully the majority of the people listening are already interested in, but maybe there's some that come for the football and end up getting, exposure to the message of the Bible on the back end. And that's why this is the reason that we're here is this second half of the podcast.
That's right. Let me tell you guys what's on my heart this week as we talk about faith in Christ, as we talk about Jesus. I guess I'll just start with this. Today, and we're recording this Sunday night, today is one of my least favorite days of the year. Today. Now, we're recording this Sunday night, November 2nd. Okay? Well, and one of my other least favorite days of the year is when college football ends. That's a tough day. I hate that day. It's like, how many days is it till kickoff, right? And if you're listening to this podcast, you're right there with us. Today's one of my least favorite days of the year because daylight savings time ended last night.
I would thought you were going to say because the World Series baseball was over.
Yeah, that too. No, because daylight savings time. Now, it was nice to have one more hour of sleep, right? That's great. But in a few hours too early, the sun went down.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be like that, going down way too early, my estimation, until March. And I really don't know why we have to do it. And I wish we didn't have to do it. And I hate it. And I cannot wait until March. And all of that is on the one hand true. That is what I really think. And on the other hand, I just started the On My Heart segment by grumbling and complaining. Everybody noticed that. I grumbled and complained. And I want to begin this real quick with an assertion. We live in a culture of complaining. Our culture is all about complaining. If you disagree, feel free to email us at Gridiron and the Gospel.
If you disagree, feel free to complain.
Yeah, that's right. We have a complaint box, right? Yeah. So some estimates are the average person complains between 15 and 30 times a day, okay? And I don't think any of us would really disagree if we really sit down and think about it. We grumble about the time change. We grumble about the temperature. We complain about bosses and employees and teachers and students. We complain about, well, I don't know, referees and officiating calls. We complain and grumble about our coaches, or we complain about the TV or lack thereof, because I have YouTube TV. And I mentioned this in the first half briefly, but I have YouTube TV. And those of you who have YouTube TV know what happened to me yesterday. I went from about 100 channels to about 80, and they happened to be the 20 I wanted on College Football Saturday because YouTube TV and ABC, ESPN, Disney are in a dispute. And so it felt like I was in 1985. I had to go find a radio or watch on a game cast.
One of our pastors is a big Oklahoma fan, and he was forced to sit there on the ESPN game cast on his tablet and just sit there and watch the lines move to see where the ball was going. Which, I mean, when you're playing a big game like that, that's just that's not the way you want to take in a big game.
No, absolutely not. And I can only imagine what that would have been like. So, but it was frustrating. I know a lot more about Fox and TNT's football coverage now than I did. So it's all good, right? There were some interesting games, but the point is we complain about stuff, right? And most of it is really meaningless. So I'm going to take you to Exodus chapter 17. I'm going to kind of skim through the first 7 verses of that. And basically the children of Israel, the people of Israel, have come out of Egypt. They've been rescued from Egypt by God. There was a series of miracles that he produced, that plagues against the Egyptians, and then they marched through the Red Sea on dry land, and then the Red Sea closed back on the Egyptian army when they tried to come through on dry land too. They've been now moving toward this place that he's promised them, this land that's flowing with milk and honey, it says in Exodus 3. But it's going to take them a little bit of time to get there, and they're traveling through a desert to get there. And they've been given miraculously bread and food, meat, from the sky by God every day except for the Sabbath. It's like free Chick-fil-A essentially happening to you, right? And now they get to this place in Exodus 17 where they camp at a place and there's no water to drink in the desert. So look, the complaints that I mentioned are like petty complaints, like a car cuts you off in traffic or something and you start complaining and grumbling. This was a real deal. This was a life and death thing. You're in the desert with about 2 million people, according to what the Bible would put it, 600,000 men, but wives, children, right? And then livestock, 2 million people in the desert, and there's no water at this oasis, air quotes, oasis. So it's a real thing, but they're forgetting what God had done for them 8 or 10 weeks earlier, and they're missing what he's doing for them in the moment, the meat and the bread that's just showing up every morning, and yet God rescues them anyway. That's what we see in the first 7 verses of Exodus 17. So real quick, let me go through it, okay? So, and by the way, let me just say this. When we complain and we grumble, the whole idea is we think we deserve better than whatever it is we're getting, okay? We think we're not getting what we deserve. And I just want to say that's actually true. No matter what your situation is, you're actually not getting what you deserve, but you don't deserve better. Right? None of us is actually getting what we deserve. And that's where, if you are a follower of Christ, and I'm speaking to you guys especially, thank God for his mercy. Thank God for his grace. Thank God that he is not giving us what we deserve, but instead he's giving us grace, his undeserved. It's undeserved on our end favor to us, right? Unmerited favor. So, but these guys, they show up, there's no water, and they're complaining. They're grumbling against Moses. And Moses, they say to Moses, give us water to drink. Give us water to drink. And they're not asking, they're demanding. Give us water to drink. They're trying to command him, to require him to figure that out. And he says, why are you complaining to me? In verse 2, why are you testing the Lord? Because that's essentially what they were doing. They're talking to their leader, but they're testing the Lord. They're putting God on trial. But basically, they continue to grumble, and it says, they said, why did you ever bring us up from Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? So now they're questioning God's provision and God's goodness to them. He brought you out of Egypt, out of slavery, and you're actually thinking you'd rather be back there, and you're ignoring how you got here, all the miracles, and you're saying, God, you're telling it to Moses, but you're saying, God, you brought us out here to kill us in the desert. That's what they're saying. And it's a really, it's insane, and it's wicked, and it's treasonous stuff by this people that God has rescued and promised an inheritance in this land flowing with milk and honey. It's really bad, but it's a glimpse into their hearts. And here's my question. Anybody out there, me, you, Brad, ever asked that? Have you ever tested God? You ever said, why did you do this? And if you skip ahead to verse 7, at the very end, it says, they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? You ever question whether he's actually present with you? Are you even here, God? You're not even here. That's essentially what they're saying. And it's just, it's bad. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 2 says that God led them into the desert, and they ended up staying 40 years to test them. And instead, they're trying to test God. Instead of trusting God, they're testing God. And so I would just ask you this, whether you're complaining about little bitty things or big things, sometimes we're in really dry seasons. Are you testing God or trusting him? Because he leads you into these things if you're a Christ follower. And he does it so that you will ask for rescue and you'll trust him for it. That's why he does it. And so when things happen, do you grumble or do you think about his goodness? Do you grumble or are you grateful? Those are the questions I would ask. One more thing. Here's the good news from Exodus 17. All right. These guys are saying these crazy things. It's really bad. Moses cries out to God, and God, despite their grumbling, despite their complaining, despite their putting him on trial, he remains faithful to his promises, and he rescues them. He rescues them. And here's what he does. In verse 5, he tells Moses essentially, I got this. He says, take your staff. I'm going to stand in front of you on this rock, and I want you to just hit the rock, and water is going to come out, and the people will drink. And so these ungrateful people, grumblers and complaining people, he rescues them anyway, because that's what Moses does. Moses strikes the rock. But don't miss the picture, because it's a foreshadowing of another rescue. God stands in front of Moses on the rock, and the idea is it's a legal language. It's like the accused standing before the judge, okay? The people are in effect putting God on trial. He's not guilty, they are, but it's a picture of him standing before a judge, God standing before a judge and bearing the judgment. Okay. And in 1 Corinthians 10, Paul he says the rock in Exodus 17 was Christ, standing in the place of the guilty, struck to provide living water. This is a picture, a foreshadowing of the gospel, the good news. And we're all sinners against him. We're all complaining and grumbling against him, and we don't deserve anything. And most of the time, we're not even crying out for him, and he saved us anyway. And I just thought to myself, I am such a grumbler and complainer about the least little thing, much less when something actually big and dire happens. I mean, it's a big deal. No water in the desert. That's life or death. So I get it. They actually had more of a legitimate concern than most of us most of the time. But man, God's got this, and God saved me. And I grumble and complain, and I'm ungrateful. And I know I've gone on and on and on, but that really struck me this week, no pun intended, as I was studying this in order to work through it with our church. And so, y'all, let me just encourage you, take a step back. If you are a Christ follower, take a step back and know that he's got you. And ask yourself, am I grumbling and complaining, or am I grateful, and am I asking him for rescue if I need it? That's what's on my heart. I could keep going, obviously, but I'm going to stop.
You know, George, when I hear that story, I just think about what the people had witnessed God do just before that, as you said, when he rescued them out of Egypt, not by any act that they could consider to be their own strength. Like it was very clear. There was no way to take it other than it was miraculous, and it was God's protection, God's provision that brought them out. And it's easy for us to sit there and say, how such a short time later could people question God and wonder whether he actually has some sort of plan for them, or whether his plan is simply their demise, which is kind of what they're getting at, right? And it's like that he's shown you, given you all the evidence to the contrary, that his plan is to bring you into something better, and yet you're doubting him. But we do that ourselves, like you said, all the time. And when we look at our circumstances, and we think that we're owed something, that we deserve more than what we have. God, why am I not getting this? Why am I not getting? Why is this prayer request taking so long to be answered? It is. I mean, I don't know that it's always a case of us testing God maybe the way that they are, but it's certainly at the very least a lack of faith, the way that we expect things. And sometimes we'll get angry with circumstances around us, and we will even wonder things, whether it's something that directly affected us or things that we see more just in the world at large, and we will ask that question, God, how can you allow this? How can you allow this type of evil and wrongdoing to take place and this injustice? And, why don't you just put an end to that? And of course, the answer is God could easily put an end to evil. He could do it now. He could have done it a long time ago. But for him to do that, it would require him to get rid of all of us, right? Just remove us and the problem solved. And that includes every single one of us. And I think we just so often we don't see the big picture of who we are, in this plan and how low we are relative to God, and that we have every reason to trust him and to need him, because without him we can do nothing. And like you said, obviously the story ends up foreshadowing what Jesus was going to do for all of us. And yet we still sometimes have difficulty latching on to that reality, which is that this work has been done. Like whatever we're going through now it may seem like a big deal to us, just like the people in the desert having no water seemed like a really big deal. But in the grand scheme of things, God has already provided for us. And whatever we're going through is just a blip on the radar screen of eternity. And it is just a great reminder that we've already been saved, that we don't need to call on God to save us from whatever's going on in our lives, that whatever the next few decades or even few years might bring, it is the long term that he's already provided for. And that should give all of us comfort, yet we still like to complain.
Yeah, no, that's right. And let me say two things. One, I mean, he definitely still wants us to call out for him and ask for help and everything. And he does. He helps. Sometimes that's part of it, is he wants you to trust him and ask him for help.
Mhm.
Sometimes he wants you to trust him and he's going to bring you through it, and it's not going to be the answer you wanted. But I've spent a lot of time here sort of, hey, I'm talking to you, Christ followers. I'm talking to you. Some of our listeners are not followers of Jesus. And I always like to put in parentheses, yet. My prayer is it's yet. If that's you, if you're dying of thirst, if you recognize that you are thirsty, you're dying, you're in a desert without water, I just want to tell you, God brought you to this podcast today to hear the good news that you can be rescued, that Jesus lived a life without sin and then took your place on the cross and paid the penalty of your sin. He was the rock that was struck to pay the penalty of your sin so that you could be saved. If you'll turn from sin and trust him, you can be saved. You will be saved, and you can drink from the living water. And I would like to talk with you. Brad would like to talk with you. We would like to share more about our faith and how you can have the same faith, how you can also be in Christ with us. So please let me encourage you. Today's the day. Reach out on Twitter at George Schroeder, at jbradedwards, or gridirongospelpod@gmail.com. We really want to talk with you and would love to do that. So you can also find us on Twitter at gridiron_gospel, and reach out to the show, and one of us will get back to you for sure. We if there's one thing we love talking more about than college football, it's talking about Jesus, and we want to do that with you. So my prayer is that people will come to faith in Christ as a result of this show. That's our whole goal, is to be witnesses and share the gospel. So Brad, man, I'm so glad you're on this week. It's fun.
Thank you for bringing me back. I appreciate the invitation, and always great to have these conversations with you.
For sure. Well, guys, you can find us online at gridironandgospel.com. I already mentioned Twitter or Instagram at gridiron_gospel. We are on YouTube, and we're not streaming, but it's recorded. Search for Gridiron and the Gospel at YouTube. We're on YouTube. ESPN apparently isn't, but we are, so good for us, right? And that's not grumbling, complaining. That's a statement of fact. Hey, and if you like this pod, and we hope that you do, please be sure to rate and review it and subscribe in your favorite podcast app. We're on all the major podcasting platforms and, of course, YouTube. Search for Gridiron and the Gospel or follow the links on these shows' website. And tune in next week for more Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast.